You can find us if you so care to at YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Facebook, Instagram, and something called Twitter. Brenton, do you know what Twitter is?
Yeah, you were tweet.
Moving along. Sometimes, David, this is how it goes.
Oh, I understand. I have days just like that.
I mean, you have one job.
Go.
Welcome back to FORTitude, folks. I am JW, and my partner Britton Payne are the hosts of FORTitude. You can find us if you so care to at YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Facebook, Instagram, and something called Twitter. Britton, do you know what Twitter is?
Yeah, you were tweet.
Moving along. You can find us at FORTitude FW on those platforms. Also, our website, fortitudefw.com. Check us out and please contact us if you have more problems than you've already contacted us about at fortitudefwpodcast@gmail.com. We welcome all your criticisms.
I got a problem. I'll tell you about it in the pain train.
We're going to go into the pain train here because Mr. Pain Train's got something to say. So without further ado, welcome to the pain train. Oh, she's coming in hot today, folks.
All right. So my son's fixing up this Jeep. And it comes with a registration sticker of 121 for the registration, or is it called the registration? Or we call it
the
like
expiration
inspection.
Date. Expiration.
I'm going to challenge you guys. Look around on the street when you're driving around. If you're listening to podcasts on the road, look how many people have expired registration stickers. You will be amazed. When you're sitting at a stoplight, look over to see if that person has a registration sticker expired or not. It is crazy how many people I think came out of the pandemic and they're like, well, one thing I can check off my list of things to do is get registration done. I mean, nobody has up-to-date registration stuff, and so I don't know where that comes from.
Code enforcement, are they maybe dropping the ball? Is that where you're throwing this to?
That's the cops. I mean, that's code enforcement on the registration. I used to always get those things done because you don't want to get nabbed for something else, something you're carrying around in the car, or how many hours at the bar you were sitting at, whatever. You got to keep that up to date.
I, for one, support our police department. Someone else on the show possibly does not, but get your inspection stickers put up to date because we don't want to see you in any harm's way.
Well, and here's the thing. We'll do this. If you can find an expired registration sticker with a police support sticker on the back, that would be the ultimate in the oxymorons we're looking
Chief
for.
Noakes, our buddy and on the show, he knows that old game. When they see that sticker, they know right away that somebody's trying to pull a fast one.
Oh, for sure.
All right, well, thank you for that little journey down the pain train.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Our guest today, Britton, is a really cool, interesting fella. He goes by the name of David Treichler, and he's currently the Director of Strategy and Technology for Oncor Delivery in Dallas, where he's responsible for strategic analysis supporting the growth of the enterprise. Did I nail that, David?
Pretty close, yeah.
Well, David is what some people call a futurist. It's a very fascinating term. Brent, do you know what a futurist is?
No, what is it?
I don't know either, but I've read a little bit of the bio, and I am definitely interested in what a futurist is. So welcome to the show, David. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, David.
First off, before we get into this thing...
There's the audience applause.
Beautiful.
Sorry, that's our in-house audience.
Your background, you're from Niagara Falls, New York, correct?
Correct.
So my partner here, aren't you from somewhere around those parts?
Yeah, the New York area.
From the adoption agency?
Have you ever been in a barrel down the Niagara Falls?
I've been at the Maid of the Mist under the falls, and I've been at the top of the falls, but I've not gone over the falls.
Okay.
We're glad you have known that. You came to Fort Worth in 1996 with the wife's job transfer.
Right.
And then you began working with Oncor at about that time, or years later?
Years later.
Years later. When did and before we can get into, might as well get into the meat of this, but you are what we call a futurist. What is a futurist?
A futurist, and you talk about oxymorons, but it sounds crazy, but a futurist is actually a historian, someone who is able to look back long ways, like millions of years in some cases, to try to figure out what's going on with our world and how the world is evolving, but is then able to take an understanding of a deep understanding of history to look at what's happening today in context to what's happened in the past, and then trying to evolve out from that the patterns of how things can evolve from here.
Mm-hmm.
So my real focus at Oncor as strategist is to try to figure out what Dallas-Fort Worth area in North Texas is going to look like 3 to 5 years from now, and what does the company need to do to try to prepare for it. And as a good example, at Oncor, we have a thing that we started a couple of years ago called Black Swan Dialogues. We sit down with our senior leadership team. And in November of 2019, one of the things we sat down and looked at was, what happens if there's going to be a pandemic?
Oh, you had talked about that before.
We talked about it. In fact, we had a protocol that had been in place since 2018. So we had prepared for that kind of eventuality. But we had conversations about a series of topics in 2019, 2020, of things that were high consequence, low probability that we had to prepare for. And interestingly enough, of the four things that we really focused on in 2019 to early 2020, 3 of the 4 have come to pass.
What are those? Pandemic?
Well, the storm in 2021.
Oh, man.
Was one of the things we talked about. Well, what happened if we have a change in our regulatory commission? Well, that changed the things that we as a company have to go do. We looked at what would happen if there's a focus on re-regulation of the utilities. What happens if there's a potential incorporation of Texas into the larger grid? Because right now, ERCOT is a separate grid. So we actually went through an analysis of what would happen if that happened and how would we respond to that. That hasn't happened this time, but it's been one of the things that's been talked about at both the commission and at the legislature this last go-round. So things that we started talking about a couple of years ago are things that have actually come to pass, not 100%, but we were starting to get ready for them because we're saying, looking back what's happened in the past, what could happen, what are the things that can cause something unexpected to occur that would have devastating effect on us. And we've had 2 of those major events just in the last 12 months.
How often does that happen like that? Because you guys have had these conversations far before this, right?
Most people never see this kind of thing actually occur. So a lot of people say Black Swan Dialogues. Yeah, that's just not likely we're going to have to really worry about that. But now everybody's sitting there saying, well, yeah. This is why we have a futurist, who's someone who can sit on our staff and kind of say, well, what if? How would we respond to that? We've had things around weather and climate was our last one. And again, that came out of the storm in February. Okay, what do we do about drought? It's a major drought in Texas. In 2011, there was a major drought. We had 40 days of consecutive heat. What happens if it becomes 80 days of consecutive heat over 100 degrees? What happens? Do we have enough water in our service territory to be able to keep people's homes cooled and people be able to take baths but also be able to cool the power plants? Because in the 2011 heat thing, we actually had a couple of plants shut down because there wasn't enough water left in the reservoirs to cool the plants. In fact, we have the same thing with the nuclear plants. So all these things are interrelated. And that's part of my discussion about going back in time and how the Earth has warmed up and then cooled off. This is not the last time we're going to see this cycle.
Certainly. Does being a futurist, does that give you a special knowledge, or sitting in these meetings with Oncor, are you the one telling them these things, or is there a whole bunch of you guys sitting around in the same mind frame? Are they like, David, why are you saying this? Do they all generally agree with what you're saying?
No, they don't always agree with what I'm saying. We have a relatively small team at Oncor in the Strategy and Emerging Issues group, which I'm the director of. And we pull together the topics. I do most of the work for the Black Swan just because of my background and my training versus the rest of the team. But everybody helps me with the research, tries to bring the information together. And then we present the scenario to the senior leadership team, and we have a discussion about it. And we've taken some significant actions in some cases based on having those discussions and saying, yeah, we really ought to have better information about this. So you need to start figuring out how are we going to, for example, electrify our fleet, because that's coming. And things of that nature. We've actually gone one step beyond that, and we now have set up a strategy coordination council for the company that meets once a month. And we walk through a strategy from one part of the company shared with 62 directors and vice presidents of the company and a few other subject matter experts, just trying to make sure everybody's coordinated and joined up at the hip about how are we reacting to these things, bringing in the discussions from the Black Swans in some cases and talking about, okay, are we executing properly to make sure that we're doing the right things for our ratepayers and for the people in North Texas to make sure that when you flip the switch, the lights are going to be on.
So
go ahead, Brenton.
What are you going to call me with some other name, like some other person or something?
Then I'll go ahead. Do you see the future as getting bright as a futurist? Do you see the future getting brighter or darker for mankind?
Both.
Okay.
Looking back and looking at what's going on now and looking at what's going forward, the thing that constantly amazes me is when I go back and I look at specific things that are happening today, and you can go back within the last 100 years and see the exact same thing has happened in our country before. You look in the 1880s and the things that were going on in terms of just how we were reacting to basically the freeing of the slaves in the United States, and how in the 1870s the election was thrown to a person who was going to end Reconstruction. Pretty heavy kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, you look at the populism that was very popular at that time, Williams Jennings Bryan and others. You know, it's the things that you see today, they're just cycles. They just keep coming back. And if you look in that time frame, you'll say we'll probably come out of the current cycle in maybe 30, 40 years. And we'll go into something else. Will it be better? Will it be worse? Who knows? Just be different. And the thing that you can be sure of is looking at things that have happened in the past, how those same forces evidence themselves today is different than it was then, because technology and other things have changed, and our societal values have changed in a lot of respects. So how we treat those things become different. And that's where I go into writing all these books I've written, the 25 books. I take topics that I'm interested in, and I try to do a deep dive in terms of how people are likely to react to a situation. An example, well, you see right there, I Believe in You. I wrote that in 2004. It's about a pandemic.
How accurate is it compared to what's happening currently?
I had a few minor changes, but depending on which theory you believe about the source of the pandemic, I may have been right or I may have been wrong.
Yeah.
Does that book, do you call it fiction or nonfiction?
It's fiction.
Fiction. How does it end, if you mind me asking, without being a spoiler? Does mankind die off, or do we?
A whole lot of people die off.
A lot of people? That's
a whole lot
fairly
of people.
close.
Well, that was kind of one of my next questions was, is population growth the problem, or is technological advancement of all of these things the problem? You brought it in where you were like, you're kind of taking it, you're looking at it from an interest of, you know, the technology affecting the way humans look at these cycles that have been happening in the past. But is the technology like this big impetus, like just whoosh, like this dividing line in that? I mean, granted, there was technology a long time ago, but
I view technology as an enabler of what's happened. Technology has enabled us to have much longer lifespans. You know, go back 100 years. How long do people average life? It was about 60. And a lot of people died in their 40s. You go back in terms of, you know, the things that people could do. In the 1850s, there were no electric lights. There were no cars. If the electric grid suddenly went away, how would life be? And some people have said, you know, it may go away. It could go away. It did go away for 5 days in February. How do people live without electricity?
Yeah.
And how but it's been an enabler of a different lifestyle. But the lifestyle in 1850 was the same lifestyle it had been in 1800 and 1750 and before that. Minor changes. But it's accelerated the change, the rate of change. Just like the social media, like what we're doing right now. Yeah. This is accelerating the rate of change because it's disseminating information much quicker than we were 100 years ago or even 10 years ago. Yeah. And consequently, people are smarter about things. And this is one of the things that I'm really starting to focus in on now is stop and think about education in 25 years. Will people really need to be able to read and write?
Watch YouTube videos.
It doesn't seem likely, though, for sure. I see where you're going with that.
So do we really need to even have an alphabet? All of a sudden, words become sound, not letters, not written.
All right.
If you want something done, you say, "Hey Alexa," or "Hey Google," or whatever. Everything is, and a lot of the things are moving towards voice technology even now on our devices. I think in 10 years you're going to find very few that have key inputs. So it'll be a voice.
So just tell it what to do.
Yeah. So,
well, can I step forward a little bit on that? So in your mind and some of your writings, what does the world look like in 50 years? Is that a fair answer? Or how about this? Yeah. What is the worst case scenario for mankind in 50 years if certain things happen?
Clearly the worst case is it'll be fire or ice. But it'll be dead.
Fire or ice.
Yeah, that's the old thing. Will the world end in fire or will it end in ice? It ends in fire if it's a nuclear bomb. It'll end in ice if we just destroy the planet.
Right.
So in 50 years, could we destroy the planet? No, we wouldn't. Even with all the climate change things that are going on 50 years, no, we'll still be here. 50 years, if the planet's going to end, it's going to be a nuclear war or something of that nature that just destroys everybody, or a pandemic of much greater magnitude than what we've seen that just destroys life as we know it. But could it end? It's feasible. Is it a black swan? Absolutely. High consequence, low probability. And in my mind, it's low probability. And one of the things that Brendan and I were talking about before was, am I an optimist or am I a pessimist?
Yeah.
For mankind. And I'm very much an optimist. You look at what we've done as a species, humankind, not Americans, not Russians, not Chinese, whatever, just humans. Humans have solved every issue that we've been faced with for the last 30,000, 40,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
We always seem to be able to find a way to resolve the things that we create for ourselves. And one of the other questions that Britton asked was, is mankind its own worst enemy? At the moment, I would say no.
Getting close?
Because I think that weather and the climate and the planet is our worst enemy at the moment. Because we haven't done anything to arrest the causes that could, in fact, overwhelm us.
Certainly.
How many people are being affected right now by the fires and stuff in California?
Yeah.
Or the drought out west? Or how many people were affected by the freeze? And looking at the fact that they say El Nino is coming back this year again, 2022, are we going to have another deep freeze in Texas? And are we ready for it? At Oncor, we're doing everything to make sure that we're ready, but we're not the ones who caused the problem last time.
Yeah.
So,
David, what in your best opinion, what is the way that ends mankind, and how far out does that go? If you obviously you've thought of these these scenarios, what's the best idea of how mankind gets ended?
As I said before, I don't think it will, and not in my lifetime anyway. That's a joke. I'm not that long, but mankind will probably end in some form. One of the series of novels I wrote was all about the ability to transfer consciousness into a roboticized body so that we will live forever. Mm-hmm. I actually wrote 3 novels from that series, starting with Ghost in the Machine. And in fact, I'm starting to work on number 27 right now, and conceptually, and that will be really focused around.
You can take that if you like.
No.
If it's a fellow futurist.
It is, but that's another story.
Is there a secret? Is there like a club of futurists? Or is there a secret club? You guys,
a secret club?
Yeah.
Is there a cabal of people out there trying to tell everybody what the world's going to be like in 100 years? Yes and no. There are a lot of people who are futurists. One guy who I would direct the audience to, if you're interested, is a guy named Tony Seba, S-E-B-A. He's a professor, I think at Stanford, and he has a group called Rethink X. And he's not a futurist per se, but he's someone who tries to create pathways to enabling things to happen. Mm-hmm. And the reason I got involved with Tony was I happened to see a presentation he made where he talked about a picture that he showed of New York City Broadway on Easter Sunday in 1900. And his question was, where's the car? And you look at the picture and you finally see there's a automobile somewhere on Broadway on 1900. And then he had another picture from 1913, 13 years later. And his question was, where's the horse? So and he says, most of his discussions are about, we sit here and say, that's not going to happen. Can't happen. Technology doesn't change. We don't change that fast. But he showed in 2 pictures that 100 years ago, we completely changed over from horses to cars, a technology adoption in 13 years. You start looking at the adoption curves for things like cell phones.
Yeah.
Adoption curves for the internet. Adoption curves are starting to develop now for electric cars and battery electric devices of different sorts. It's all happening in much faster, accelerated timeframes. Mm-hmm. Look how fast Facebook took off.
Yeah,
going from college group at Harvard to 3 billion people worldwide, just in a very few short years. So the adoption of technology is accelerating, and while I think a lot of people will sit here and say, well, the technologies that are being applied are applying different kinds of things, and they're not the fundamental shifting kinds of technologies like an electric grid from a no electric grid where everything transforms. Well, the internet pretty much shifted everything again.
Yeah.
And there will be other things, the Internet of Things they're talking about, where the internet now controls everything in your house and your streets. Those are the kinds of things that will fundamentally change who we become. And that goes back to my thing about education. When you get to the point where you have artificially intelligent devices that will make all your decisions for you, all you have to do is blink at something and it automatically knows that that's what you want to do, because we already have blink recognition things for cars and other things that they can use. You won't even have to say anything to it. It'll know what to do for you.
Right.
So what's your value in the equation now?
Well, and then the other question is, how susceptible does that make humankind for either the opposition of other humans upon them, or just if the machine has a glitch, right? You know, I was driving next to somebody to Austin yesterday. The guy's sitting back there on his phone. He's in a Tesla. He's got no hands on the wheel, probably no feet on the, I mean, we're going 75 down the freeway and he's just letting the car drive it. And it's like, well, I know even at this day, even a brand new laptop will still get the blue screen of death if you push it hard enough. And so it is this kind of question of.
Yeah, I'll point you to the tragic flaw. The premise of that novel is that we have now gone to all autonomous drive vehicles, and they've outlawed self-drive vehicles
in California,
nationwide, worldwide. Worldwide. You know, it's a little bit in the future, a few years, but they find out in the story that there was a 0-day defect in the software. And all of a sudden, all of the systems stopped on the same day, so you can no longer go anywhere, except for the hero who has a 2012 Tesla that his uncle had in a garage for 200 years.
And that could lead us to something like this, maybe. we talked about nuclear war earlier, but how big a likelihood, not to cover up the automation technology, is that's something we want to discuss as well. But how likely do you think this is in the history of the near history, the future history, whatever?
And the recent history, the United States dropped 2 bombs in a war. So the United States has no moral agency about nuclear war. 0. We're the only nation in the world that has actually engaged in nuclear warfare. So is it likely? I'd say the fact that it's not happened in 70 years is a miracle. And the fact that we have some crazy people around the world who have access to those things, even if it's only just a dirty bomb, which is like using the nuclear stuff that comes out of a sensor in a hospital X-ray machine, you know, that can cause major damage in a community where people can't live there for 30 to 40 to 50 years. You know, would we have a major war where we lose the whole world? My opinion, again, this is just one person who's been looking at history and looking at this stuff and worked for a defense contractor, is that even if we had an all-out nuclear war, mankind would not cease to exist. We would still be here, a whole lot fewer of us, but we would survive as a species, and we would find a way to dig our way back out of that scenario. So I would say it is highly likely that there will be a limited nuclear war, potentially in our lifetime.
So I was going to ask kind of if you can do a chronology, because we've talked about kind of war and fighting, population, electricity a little bit, you know, or energy sources in there. And then, well, let's just go, well, we could say money or something, but let's just go with those 3. So you've written all of these books. Do you have a pattern you go to where it's like, okay, here's mankind. Man, you know, gets to a point where he starts getting greedy or fighting with somebody. Then it's about an electricity or just like a, you know, one natural resource or made new resource. Do you have kind of a, I'm not asking for your playbook on how to write it, but these recurring themes that you've seen with all of this kind of research and writing that keep presenting themselves? And what would be the chronology of those kind of big items?
I only have written really one book that goes to that extent, and that's called Lucifer. I would just direct people to go read that if they're interested.
Heartwarming classic? What is that about?
It's about a future world where we have had peace for 100 years. And what happens when we have an event that removes that which keeps us peaceful.
Interesting. Okay.
And interesting enough, it's based on technology that exists today.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I ended up working with that technology for a number of years, actually sold a whole bunch of it internationally to some of our international partners when I was working for a defense contractor. So it exists.
Yeah.
Can we circle back a little bit to
Sure.
the social media piece?
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about it just a second ago, but where do you, we all know we've seen we've seen Social Dilemma. We all understand our kids are now basically robots in some regard, but where does social media, where's it going to lead us, and how does that mess get solved or not?
Another book did I bring it? I think I did bring it. It's called Truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about regulating social media. And in that case, it comes back to what is, again, since I focus in on the human side of this whole thing, the book really focuses in on the toll it takes on the people who have to mediate the media to try to keep us from killing each other.
Okay. So I'm going to ask this question like an odds maker question.
Mm-hmm.
Nuclear war, natural disaster, or social media technology, like forcing humans against each other. Which happens first in our lifetime?
I'm an optimist about social media because it's so new and it's so young that we will figure it out. We will figure out a way to make it work for everybody.
Is that your doomsday alarm, by the way?
No, it's just telling me what the guy sent me.
Seek shelter.
Who called before.
Is there a nuclear weapon heading our way?
Could you do that on a podcast? Could you, like, I just kind of did like a fire in the movie theater. I don't know if we may have to edit that out. Here, I'll do it like this. Okay, there we go.
Now, I'm not concerned about a nuclear war in the short term, only because the people who are most likely to want to use those kinds of weapons aren't desperate enough to do it yet. If certain trends continue, it could be pushed in that direction, and it won't be somebody that we expect who will have the weapon, but they will have acquired it from somebody we didn't know had it. My guess is how that will play out. And that's because I think that the only way it will get used is because it will be an unreasonable man, I'll put it that way, who will have chosen to emulate himself, a whole bunch of his friends, and anybody else he may know.
Right.
And just to prove a point and hope that somebody remembers him after he's gone.
Right.
Well, and that weapon could also not serve something like this. It could be something as simple as an algorithm that knocks out all of the electricity that then maybe ultimately leads to people going against each other or something like that.
An algorithm that knocks out electricity, again, is going to be a short-term kind of thing.
Okay.
Our electric grid is becoming more and more sophisticated, but a lot of it is still based on technology that in some cases is 100 years old. It would be very hard for someone to take out our entire grid permanently.
Yeah.
We would be able to get it back up relatively quickly. And to be piecemeal, a little bit would go out here, a node would go out here, a substation maybe here. Someone may be able to, take a generator offline. But in the state of Texas, there are 710 generators. You take out one, you take out five.
Right.
For the most part, you're not going to end life as we know it on Earth.
Yeah.
We've built a very resilient society. Why am I all of a sudden very popular at the prime? I don't think
because we're doing this podcast live.
That happened to me once before when I was up on stage and a call came in. It was my dentist.
Oh, nice.
Giving me the results of an examination that I had to go back and have done.
Talk about doomsday.
That's like Marathon Man with Dustin Hoffman when he does that whole thing.
Yes, I remember that piece. Yes. That was one of my good favorite movies as well too.
Oh yeah.
But that's another thing a futurist does. The futurist looks at what all the Hollywood people say and I spend a lot of time debunking their theories and saying, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it, but that's not how I would write it.
Right.
But again, the reason why I'm a futurist, other than the fact that that's what I do for a living with being a strategist, is I try to use the novels and things I write to let me understand how this can all play out for us. Because too many people just look at technology and they say, "Oh, that's bad, that's bad. Well, that's good, that's good," but they don't really go to the next step of saying, "Yeah, this could cause this to happen." The guy who is the chief technology officer for, I believe, Google, is a guy named Kurzweil, and he has a theory that by 2045 we'll be able to transfer human consciousness into computers.
I thought that was already happening with the vaccine.
No.
Just kidding.
No. And he's serious. He absolutely is serious. And in fact, that was the stimulus for me to write that series of 3 books where we actually do transfer it into a roboticized body. Now, when he originally thought about it, he thought it more in terms of actually subsuming it into a computer. But I actually moved it into a mechanical robot, saying that, we're not going to be ready to go to be just electrons. We're going to want to be something else as an intermediate. And maybe 1,000 years down the road, we may want to. But if you've got a machine that's you now, every time the parts wear out, you just replace them. You just keep on going. Mankind could live forever.
In that scenario, would I be able to find a partner on the podcast to do more work, actual work around here? Is that, you think that's possible? Just asking.
It depends on that partner's consciousness.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Well, I've already frozen some in a carbon thing, like Han Solo.
You and Walt Disney?
Yeah. So I will live on forever.
True? No. David, real quick, back to electricity.
Yes.
Is electricity something will be needed in the future? Will that go away in 100 years?
Not electricity, no.
Exponentially grow need?
In 100 years, will we get to the point where we can generate all electricity on a renewable basis? 100 years? Maybe, if we can figure out some way to be able to transmit it.
Printing money or mining for money in the future?
Cryptocurrency is going. They're supposed to be releasing that. They're supposed to be releasing their first exchange traded funds for Bitcoin in the next few days. It's becoming a mainstream kind of investment vehicle. Yeah, it's going to be around.
Do you spend much time with crypto?
I'm doing a strategy for Oncor right now around blockchain and cryptocurrency.
Can you share your summary?
No,
can't share that.
No.
What does the crypto market mean for people who don't really grasp it, and why is it so relevant?
It enables a different way of accounting for things that don't require banks.
Does it enable a different way for building out an electrical grid?
Not how we would build out the grid, but how we would manage the grid.
Or infusion of capital in order to do,
how people pay their bills.
Yeah.
Transactive energy where, you have a sun panel on your roof. You're generating more power than you need today. There's somebody else, someplace else in the country who needs some power. I'll put my excess energy into the grid and I'll sell it to them using blockchain to transact the sale of the power.
So crypto will be around exponentially into the future. There's no slowing this thing down at this point
until it's replaced, just as hard currency is being replaced. Hardly anybody carries actual cash anymore. Why would you? You don't need it. I
need to buy a sandwich or something.
Well, everybody's going to be able to take a scan of your eyeball pretty soon, and your eyeball pays for you. Because everything is wired back into the computers that will automatically see, okay, it's JW, that's his eyeball. Okay, he's just authorized this account.
Right.
Off you go. And he authorized it because he blinked at the camera.
So in bringing us kind of back around and kind of slowly going to the wrap up, you can't answer this either where it's like, you don't have a choice, we're there. Is it good? I mean, what's happening with technology hurting us more than it's helping us?
Oh, think back to 1850. 1850s technology. Was that a lifestyle that you'd like to live, or would you rather live the lifestyle we have today with all the technology that enables all the stuff for us?
Well, I don't know what was going on in 1850. Like, was that
wagon train time?
Yeah,
let's see my kids more.
Because you now have 25 of them working the farm so that you can actually grow enough food.
Wigwam or something.
In the wigwam, But again, it's the thing of technology enables a different lifestyle and will continue to accelerate. It will change how we interact with each other, which is what I come back to, which is we're being intermediated by all this technology. So when do we get to the point where people can't talk to each other anymore?
Are we going to get to that point, you think? We're getting there.
I wrote a novel about that too.
Yeah.
Actually, I wrote a screenplay about that what somebody bought and it almost got made. It was called Avatar.
Oh, nice.
Not the Avatar that they made though, right?
James Cameron actually read my script but didn't use it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But so somehow you never saw any royalties off that, I'm guessing.
I did see a royalty, but not from Cameron, from another party that took it.
Good.
Because I took a different approach to the topic of avatars.
Right.
And as I understand it, a filmmaker did make a film from it, but I'm not sure what he ended up doing.
I would think you need a really good lawyer being what you're doing.
Oh, I paid. Yeah, I got paid for it, so I was happy I got paid for it.
Yeah, but to protect some of these ideas, right, that you see kind of come into fruition. I don't know if you can do that per se.
I write the books and let people think about it because I'm I'm like the burr under the saddle. I'd rather get people thinking about stuff than give them the answers.
Yeah.
And it's just with my own team. I ask a whole lot more questions than I give them answers to things. And when we do our Black Swan dialogues, I paint the picture and say, how do we respond to this? And then we have a discussion about that. And it's not just me, it's everybody coming in and saying, yeah, we need to go do this or we need to go do that. And then we go off and start working on those issues.
Any thoughts on modern medicine, where we're headed with that? Are we going to cure certain things? Are we going to cure cancer in the future? Any thoughts there? The
pandemic has accelerated everything we were doing in medicine. We're probably going to be 10 years ahead of where we would have been otherwise with what's happened, particularly with the vaccines.
Right.
The fact that we can have vaccines now for a whole lot of things we never even thought about. Going back to I Believe in You and the whole one I did about pandemic, one of the things that was in that book was really focusing on the role that vaccines play. And just the fact that pharmaceutical companies don't find enough volume in a lot of diseases that we have to be able to make any money, so they don't put any money into the research for it. Well, with this mRNA approach, we now are going to be able to batch stuff for much smaller amounts to make money for the pharmaceutical companies to attack some of these things that up until now we just haven't bothered to go after because the people who have to make the vaccines and stuff couldn't make any money doing it. So I think we're going to see just a huge expansion of medicines and treatments to address how people have addressed their issues with different diseases. But we're also with the CRISPR gene splicing, gene technology stuff. You're going to have most babies within 10 years will probably be very, very healthy. You won't have the birth defects and the other things that you have. You won't have as much genetic frailties that come out. We're going to just be a healthier people to begin with. And there's already a whole lot of research going on about lifespan extension, really focusing in on the human body's response to deprivation. There's a professor by the name of Walter something or other out in California who actually will sell you a kit to extend your life, where you basically fast according to a very reduced diet 1 week a month. And he believes that will expand your lifespan. People right now are saying most people probably won't live past 120. But the babies who are being born today, a lot of them will make that number. And a lot of it comes back to the telomeres and just how your cells, degrade over time. But I think we're going to see an expansion of lifespan. And if my predictions in Ghost of the Machine come true and we can go to mechanicized bodies, why not?
Right.
We're seeing more and more heart replacements, liver replacements. We're able to replace major parts of the human body. When do we get to the point where you just replace it all? Except for your consciousness.
So now you bring up something interesting, stronger humans when the rise of the machines comes too. This is, and it's all generated by technology. It's kind of crazy to think about that.
Yep.
What about population growth and then the same breath, food supply? How do these things coexist in a future?
Well, in 1850, no one thought there would be 6 billion people in the world because they didn't think there was enough food. Well, right now we have enough food generally for the world.
Well, especially if we fast for a week every month.
But again, it comes back to the fact that our technologies will allow us to find ways to start replacing cows. We'll be able to grow hamburger. We already do. So if we don't need nature in its current form to provide all the foodstuffs for us, where's the limit?
Yeah. Well, especially if we become machines.
Because we don't
just
need
more electricity from Oncor.
That's the one thing that in my novels, the character has to recharge periodically. So that's the thing that slows her down, the main character.
Oh yeah.
Before we run out of time, David, talk about Tesla a little bit. You mentioned that off air before the show, but what's going on with Tesla, and you had some thoughts there.
Well, as we know, the Tesla factory in Austin is going to be opening up here very soon, probably right after the first of the year. Tesla, from the analysis that I've done and things I've been reading and people I've talked to, they're going to start replacing the major manufacturers because of the volume of vehicles they're going to be able to produce. Classic example is Ford. They have the Ford F-150, which could be the #1 electric vehicle in the world if they wanted it to be, particularly in Texas. Since the whole world is Texas, why do we care? I'm talking with the people at Ford. They say that by 2023, they will have produced 150,000 of them. And I said, for Texas? And they said, no, for the world. This plant down here in Austin that Tesla's getting ready to open will produce 3 million vehicles a year when it gets up to full capacity. And that's one of 4 plants that they've got now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're expanding the capacity in California. They're opening up their Berlin plant within the next few months. And that has capacity for 2 million cars. And they're already producing 500,000 in China. And they're going to be able to produce over 1 million in China by the end of next year. You know, Tesla it's going to, and one of the things I was reading was that they are able to produce their cars for 1/3 the cost of what Volkswagen builds their electric car for.
And that's Volkswagen. That's not even American-made vehicles.
Right.
Is this kind of like, do you look back as the futurists, like you talked about, do you look back to like the kind of the Japanese invasion of all those cars when it just with the American cars from then?
With what Tesla's doing, I made the comment, I don't know whether to invest in Tesla or not, because if Elon decides to go work SpaceX and not do cars anymore, what happens to Tesla?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it comes back to the innovator is the person who drives the change. And when the innovator is no longer driving the change, will the bureaucrats who come in behind them to run the company do what the innovator would have done, or will they do what they would do? And consequently, the whole thing changes over again.
Right.
We struggle with that succession plan here at the podcast.
Yes.
Quite often.
I already have the plan in place. Don't worry. But speaking back about Elon, I read many years ago, Elon's goal, his life goal is to go to Mars and come home. Mm-hmm. You know, the cost is something like $50 billion to achieve this. At least it was back then. Do you foresee us living on Mars or the moon? Do you see more of this stuff happening?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're supposed to go back to the moon in 2024. Elon's going to have a private individual fly around the moon, I think next year in his Starship. Space tourism. Well, it's going to be the kind of thing where he's going to walk. Elon's going to walk up to Joe and say, "Well, if you're not going to send anybody, I'll do it."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in fact, the novel that I'm publishing tomorrow, as I was indicating before, one of the characters is the guy who flies a spaceship, a supply ship for Elon after he's dropped the people on Mars, flies the resupply ship up to bring up things that they need until they can start making it on the planet and coming back.
Does he have to wait at the port of Long Beach for those boats to get in?
No.
Or how's that work? No.
He's got his own spaceport in Boca Chica, and he actually lives there now.
Yeah.
He lives in a $50,000 house in Boca Chica, Texas. He's worth $600 billion or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Does the world run out of oil in your mind?
No, because we'll stop using it before it's gone.
That's good to hear for some people.
We'll come up with other things that are other uses for it. So there'll always be a oil market. It just won't be at the volumes we're at today. Because
what replaces it?
Electricity.
Batteries.
Well, it's the green generation. It's solar. It's wind. It's biofuels. There's all kinds of things that one of the things we've been looking at a lot recently is compressed air energy storage, where you take the excess energy you have that you generate during the day, and then you compress air into underground salt domes in Texas. And you could actually compress enough air in a salt dome in Texas to be able to run a substantial portion of the grid for a week. So if we ever had a storm like we had before, with enough salt domes with this compressed air energy storage, they just turn the switch and they start letting it out of its compressed state, and it turns a turbine and creates electricity. Mm-hmm. And there's no inputs. There's no fossil fuels involved. It's whatever generated the force to compress that air in the first place.
Right.
It's all green. But it could make our grid so much more reliable than it is today, because you would have the ability to have a long-term energy storage that if you had an event like we had in February, you just turn that on and release it and keep everybody's lights on until the cold snap is moved on.
Right. David, I truly think it's just fascinating stuff, and we appreciate you saying this. Do any of your friends, any people that you know, think you're kind of cuckoo? I mean, does people think you're crazy with some of your ideas?
I don't know anybody who thinks I'm sane.
Fair enough.
Good answer.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we always ask our guests this, family aside, and this will be interesting coming from a futurist. Best day of your life?
I'm a perverse person. So the best day of my life was the day that I learned that I was going to have to wear glasses for the rest of my life.
Interesting.
Because that was the day I realized I wasn't going to be going to the Air Force Academy and being a pilot. And I actually was going to have to work for a living and figure out how to do something with my brain rather than with my body.
Interesting.
That's a great answer.
How do people find you in your books?
How do they find me?
Yes.
You can go to Amazon under DH Treichler. It's all one word. Or it's www.dhtreichler.com. Or you could go to www.globalvinosnob for my blogs for world travel that I've done, because a lot of the stuff takes place in other countries around the world. But I'll tell you all about the good food to eat in Italy or in Albania or whatever you want to do for the places I've been. Or you can go to if3.org, which is the Institute for Future Fiction, which is an organization I started for other people to encourage other writers to write this kind of fiction.
David Treichler, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.